panelists comprising both faculty members and students will deliberate upon from literary, sociological, and historical perspectives. We request our principal, Madam Dr. Ajunta Paul, to deliver her inaugural address.
Bravo. I hope I'm audible. A very good afternoon. It's indeed a privilege for me to be asked to deliver the inaugural address at the present event, which is titled Climate Change, Impact on Our Ecosystem. With regard to the ecosystem, to address the challenges implicit in it and pledge efforts towards the alleviation. It is our way of being a part of the modern vision of India and all that stands for at this strategic juncture of its history, namely the 70th anniversary of its formation, which we are all familiar with, and we know it was among warming. And again, global is an issue which we are more or less conversant with, and we realize that it is a process which is there since centuries, but it has accelerated in the age of the Anthropocene. What is this Anthropocene? It is the which from industrial revolution, which took place in Europe and the United States between the 18th and the mid-19th century. So this is begins from what is known as the early modern era to our present times. Now, the Industrial Revolution brought about radical changes in the modes of production. It introduced, for instance, the use of power-driven machinery and rapid urbanization with workers migrating as carbon emissions and other polluting agents intensified in the atmosphere over the ages, global warming increased significantly. At first, impactful and noticeable changes in climate were seen, and these changes became linked to an adverse effect on all aspects of elemental, natural, and human life, to the point of irreversible to natural environment. The planet stands endangered as never before. As temperature rises, glaciers retreat, and the flow of rivers is affected, flood droughts, whirlwinds, heat waves, and landslides are the disastrous natural outcomes increasingly faced by most countries. Now, to cite just one example, India experienced unprecedented early heat waves across 16 states in this year, that is 2022. The delicate ecological balance maintained by a harmonious coexistence of the different species in their scientifically congealed natural habitats is being systematically destroyed as man rapaciously plunders the earth to satisfy his greed. We probably do not realize that as we try to quench our thirst for material things, water, the very source of life on the planet, is running out. According to the Global Climate Change Index 2017, India, unfortunately, is ranked fourth in the list of countries most affected by climate change. Temperature rises on the Tibetan Plateau, for instance, are causing Himalayan glaciers to retreat, threatening the flow rate of rivers such as the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, and the Yamuna, and other major rivers. The frequency and power of storms and heat waves are increasing in India because of climate change. Several landslides and floods are projected to become increasingly common in such states as Assam. Meghalaya and some of the other northeastern states of India are concerned that rising sea levels will submerge much of Bangladesh and spawn a refugee crisis. If severe climate change occurs, as it is projected to, Bangladesh and parts of India that border it may lose vast tracts of coastal land. Thousands of people, incidentally, have already been displaced by ongoing sea level rises that have submerged low level islands in the Sundarbans. Thus, population influxes and demographic dislocations are bound to be the result of such coastal submergence. Greenhouse gas emissions by India, which are responsible for atmospheric pollution, are the third largest in the world, a rank certainly not to be proud of. And the main source of this type of pollution is coal. Vehicular emission, industrial waste, crop burning, agricultural crop burning, and power generation are among the biggest sources of air or atmospheric pollution in India. Now, with regard to water, illegal dumping of raw material or raw sewage, silt, and garbage into rivers, lakes, and seas has severely contaminated India's waters. Heat waves and other natural calamities caused by global warming lead to economic slowdowns, which in turn cause widespread food and water shortages affecting the socioeconomic life of people. So, in a nutshell, I tried to mention the socioeconomic ravages that are the repercussions of global warming and climate change. Submergence of coastal areas, as I've already pointed out, leads to displacement and wildfires and contamination have led to significant loss in biodiversity, which in due course is expected to cause widespread extinction of species and eventually doom for the planet and its inhabitants. And these are all issues which are going to be addressed sequentially by our later speakers. The present program has been creatively curated by our students and teachers, with both constituents equally contributing to its overall design. There will be talks, discussions, and a cultural offering, which will together strive to press on us the need to preserve, the need to collectively preserve our planet. I welcome all of you to this unique event because of the gracious opportunity extended to us through the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav platform, Government of India. Really grateful to the Ministry of Sciences, Technology, and the Ministry of Earth Sciences for their kind patronage of this event of ours. The is indeed too much with us, as the English romantic poet had so memorably. The Romantic poets, coming as they did in the wake of the Industrial Revolution, saw only too clearly the evils wrought by the new philosophy and practice. That is, this practice of the theories propagated by the Industrial Revolution. And these poets invariably sought solace, recuperation, and transcendence of their situation in and through physical nature. As I have maintained earlier, too, in different fora, for the earth to survive, the world has to recede. I repeat, for the earth to survive, the world has to recede. Idealistic and even ironical as this may sound, we need to concentrate less on worldly pursuits and more on fostering a spiritual connection between people, places, flora, fauna, and other entities and categories, integrating them into a holistic unity. In this regard, I would like to share a poem with you, which I wrote some time back. Please bear with me. The poem is called Return to Sanity, and it goes thus. The world needs to slow down for the earth to quicken, recover, and bloom. Our travels have despoiled the skies without bringing us any closer to a mutual paradise. We need to reflect on the nature of change before hoping for a change in nature. I see little, understand less as I ponder human recklessness. The progress of the earth to a pristine purity must surely be preceded by our return to sanity. End of the poem. And with that, I declare the present deliberations open, along with the prayer that the deliberations may prove to be enlightening, enriching, and withal fruitful. Thank you very much.
Uh, we are really indebted to our principal, ma'am, for her beautiful rendition of Return to Sanity, a poem composed by ma'am herself. Ma'am spoke about how industrial revolution caused severe damages and how it led to mass migrations, uh, in pollutants in the air, and ma'am also ended with a note of she basically urged to preserve our flora and fauna, to do our bit to save the earth and sort of which climate change has brought about. So with that, ma'am has set the tone for today's webinar, and we are indeed grateful to our principal, ma'am. And we would now like to invite our next speaker. She is Srimati Noyana from the Department of Environmental Sciences, and Noyana's topic is Impact of Climate Change on Food Security. So over to you, Noyana.
Thank you, madam. Yes, I am Noyana Dappu, Department of Environmental Science. My topic is on the impact of climatic change on food security. First, the World Summit in year 1996 in that the food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food which meets their dietary needs and preference for an active well-being. And First, food security is one of the leading concerns associated with climate change. It affects food security in complex ways. Food security impacts crops, livestock, forestry, and can cause social and economic consequences. Yet, livelihood rate disruption and adverse health impacts. According to FAO, in the year 2016, indicates both biophysical and social vulnerabilities determine the net impact of climate change on society. The first dimension relates to the availability of sufficient food or overall ability of the agricultural system to meet food demand. Its subdimension include the agroclimatic fundamentals of crop and pasture production and the entire range of socio-economic and cultural factors that determine where and how farmers respond to market. The second dimension is it relates to individuals who are in high risk of temporarily or permanently losing their access to the resources needed to consume adequate food. And of unstable access is primary variability. Just for example, let's agriculture. Laborers who almost depend on agricultural wages in a region erratic rainfall and have few savings with high risk of losing access to food. Third dimension, access by individuals to adequate resource to acquire appropriate food for a nutritious diet. The fourth dimension is the utilization or absorption of food, which encompasses all food safety and quality aspects of nutrition. Its subdimension are therefore related to health, including the sanitary conditions across the entire food chain. In a world where trade is possible at reasonable low cost, the crucial issue for food security is not whether the monetary or non-monetary resources at disposal of population are sufficient and everyone access to adequate quantities of. Just for example, Hong Kong and Singapore are not self-sufficient, whereas India is self-sufficient, but large portion of India's population is not food secure. First, I focus on impacts on food production and availability. The effect is climate change affects food production directly through changes in agroecological conditions and indirectly by affecting growth and distribution of incomes and the demands for agricultural products. Second, temperature and precipitation associated with continued emission of GHG gas will bring changes in land suitability and croppings. IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel of Climatic Change, considers four families of socio-economic development. Associated emission scenario known as SRES, Special Report on Emission Scenario. SRES A1 is a business as usual scenario corresponding to highest emission, whereas B1 corresponds to the lowest. Importantly, for agriculture and world food supply, SRES A2 assumes highest projected population growth. It is United Nations high projection. Depending on SRES emission scenario, global mean temperature is projected to rise in range from 1.8 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius. In temperate latitude, higher temperature are expected to bring predominantly benefit to agriculture. A moderate incremental warming in some humid and temperate grassland may increase pasture productivity and reduce the need of housing and for feed. In semi-arid region, arid pasture likely to reduce livestock productivity and increase livestock mortality. Some cultivated areas in dry areas become unsuitable for cropping, and some tropical grassland may become range of many agricultural pests and increase the ability of population to survive the winter and spring enhancing accumulation. In such double cropping line by between 10 million and 20 million hectare and land suitable for triple cropping would impact of food supplies. Includes and regional more variable at present with increase the frequency and severity of extreme events such like cyclone, drought, by bringing great fluctuation in crop yield and local food supplies and higher risk of landslides, erosion damage, they can adversely affect the stability of the food supplies and thus food security. Just for example, Midwest of United States, the northeast of Argentina, South Africa, Southeast Australia have traditionally extreme climatic variability than other regions such as Central America, Africa and Europe. Semi-arid region like sub-Saharan Africa and part of South Asia, droughts, reduced crop yields, livestock number and productivity. It is the poorest region with the highest level of chronic undernourishment, which leads to the highest degree of instability of food production. Next, I focus on impact of climate change on food utilization. Food change will affect the ability of individuals to use food effectively by altering the conditions for food safety, changing the disease pressure from diseases. The main concern about climate change, food security, is that changing the climatic condition initiate a vicious cycle where infectious disease cause or compounds hunger, which in turn marks the affected population more susceptible to infectious diseases. IPCC emphasizes that increased temperature will increase the frequency of food poisoning, particularly in temperate region. Warmer seas can contribute reef fish poisoning. In tropical region, the rising temperature was strongly associated with increased episode of diarrheal diseases in adults and children. So extreme rainfall can increase the risk of outbreak of waterborne disease like cholera. Impact of climate change, access of food. In this case, over the last 30 years, falling real prices for food and rising real income have led to substantial improvements in access of food in many developing countries of our world. East Asia and to a lesser extent the Northeast or North African region have particularly benefited from a combination of lower food prices and robust income growth. In East Asia, it was endogenous income growth that provided the basis for the boost demand. In Near East of Africa region was part endogenous revenues from oil and gas export, and additional food supply came largely from imports. FAO's longer term outlook to 2050 suggests that importance of improved demand side condition will even become more important over the next 50 years. The strongest impact change on economic output of agriculture is expected for sub-Saharan Africa, which means that the poorest and most insecure region is also expected to suffer the largest contraction of agricultural income. Then I focus impact of food prices. On average, prices of food expected to rise moderately in line moderate increase in temperature until 2050. After 2050, with further increase of temperature, and they are expected to increase more substantially. And third one is price changes expected from effects of global warming are on average much smaller than price change from socio-economic development paths. In case of India, it is our country, climatic change presents an additional stress on India's long-term food security challenges as it affects food production in many ways. First one, it may cause significant increases in inter-annual and inter-seasonal variability of monsoon. Monsoon rainfall, according to World Bank estimates based on International Energy Agency current policy, for a global mean temperature of 4 degrees Celsius, there will be 10% increase in annual monsoon intensity and 15% increase in year-to-year variability. World Bank in the year 2013 predicts that drought will pose an increasing risk in northwestern part of the India, while southern India will experience increase in wetness. The regions with high food insecurity and inequality increased frequency of drought will affect children more given their vulnerability. Some precautionary measures necessary for that. First one is adaptation of sustainable agriculture, which is active for increased productivity in all segments of agriculture. Second one, in the need to set up public for water and nutrient efficient, more efficient, and also which are more tolerant of temperature. That type of plants are required for cultivate. Third one, agricultural policy should focus on improving crop productivity and developing safety nets to cope with the risk of climate change. Fourth one, for an improvement of livelihoods of the poor people and insecure poverty. and hunger, but also withstand, recover from, and adapt to climate risk they expose to. The Swachh Bharat mission, which aims to construct 10.4 million individual toilets, 0.5 million public toilets, and adopt scientific solid waste management in 4041 towns. These steps help to improve food absorption, living condition of the urban informal settlement. Government needs to take a long-term view of disaster relief in case of poor, inadequate, and mostly short-lived India's disaster management strategies. So it is an overview of the global impact of climatic change on food security. So there is need for an integrated assessment of the impact of climate change on food security.
Thank you for that detailed overview of the different dimensions of food security and food availability and how it impacts life in general and health in particular. So with that, we now would like to invite our third speaker for today. She is Shornali Nandon, our semester 6 student from the
My name is Shornali Nino. Understanding the shape contour of the summer monsoon. Looking onto I'm a student. I'm just honored. I'm going to talk about the arts in these years as an activity. Just is the important in the Indian subcontinent. Some record rainfall, a scenario that may become the new normal as climate change increases the frequency of extreme weather. instance, monsoon periods of drought. Rains started, then came on with a fierce intensity. Why have retention in India. Studies show that extreme precipitation even rise in large parts of India, especially multi-digits that led to large warmer temperatures with the which is increased flow ranges and Brahmaputra rivers. And importantly, destruction of mountains and hills, as well as development of floodplains and marshes, are increasing the risk, as seen in last years. Historic floods in the southern state of Kerala. Those rainfall and manage dam reservoirs and construction in the hill contributed to building business. Floods in August 2008 to 453 lives, affected 5.4 million the state's airport. With a building on a floodplain, what can India do to reduce the
There is, I think, an internet connection. We are just checking out. Please give us. Here, please. হটস্পটে অন আছে হ্যাঁ আমার হটস্পটে অন আছে আমি কি কলেজে কিছু ওয়াইফাই এ করে ধরা হ্যাঁ স্টার্ট
Meanwhile, new ecosystem-based flood management approaches being promoted by international agencies have yet to catch on in India. That includes planning cities with ponds and permeable surfaces, restoring wetlands and forests, and regulating development in floodplains and hills, said Raghu Murtugudde, professor of Earth Sciences at the University of Maryland. Flood zone mapping and regulation of the sort that would have helped the townships along the Ulhas River was proposed decades ago, but has not been implemented. The global population is 8 billion. India is home to 17.5% of the global populace. Climate change is a means for all of us as global citizens and as Indians, and sustainable development seems like the only possible escape. As Ronald Reagan has rightly stated, and I quote, "Preservation of our environment is not a liberal or conservative challenge. It's common sense." Thank you.
We thank Shornali for giving us an overview of large-scale flooding in general, the melting of the glaciers and deforestation, amongst other things. We apologize for the technical hitch that we went through on our part. We would now like to request our next speaker. She is Dr. Gini Bhattacharya from the Department of Bengali, and her topic is Prokriti, Poribesh o Sahitya, Nature, Environment and Literature. Over to you, Gini.
থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ নবনীতা দি। আমার আলোচনার বিষয় নবনীতা দি আগেই বলে দিয়েছেন, প্রকৃতি, পরিবেশ ও সাহিত্য। যেহেতু সাহিত্যের কথা আছে তাই একটা কবিতা দিয়ে শুরু করি। জয় গোস্বামীর কবিতা। ফ্যাকাশে হলদেটে সূর্য বিরাট চাকার মতো ছড়িয়ে রয়েছে 700 কোটি বছরের পরের আকাশে। সমস্ত জ্বালানি পুড়ে শেষ, বালির সমুদ্র খাতে আমি হাত জোর করে দাঁড়াই। আমার কপালে এসেও ঝরে পড়ো রৌদ্র নয়, সূর্য পোড়া ছাই। যদি পুরো কবিতাটা পড়া যায় তবে দেখা যাবে সূর্য থেকে পৃথিবী সৃষ্টির প্রাচীন যে মুহূর্ত, তাকে কবিতায় আশ্রয় করাই ছিল কবির প্রধান লক্ষ্য। প্রকৃতি, বিজ্ঞান এবং সাহিত্যের কি অনায়াসে একটা অভিনব সহাবস্থান ঘটেছে এই কবিতাটিতে, তা না পড়লে বিশ্বাস করা যায় না। প্রকৃতির শব্দটা একদিকে যেমন নিসর্গ প্রকৃতিকে অর্থ চিহ্নিত করে, ঠিক তেমনি মানুষের স্বভাবকে বা জীবের অন্তর প্রকৃতিকে বোঝাতেও এই একটা শব্দই কিন্তু প্রযুক্ত হয়। বোঝা যায় প্রকৃতি শব্দটার অর্থের মধ্যে নিসর্গ এবং মানব জগতের একটা সুন্দর সঙ্গতি সাধন করা হয়েছে। তাই সহজেই মানুষের সৃষ্ট সাহিত্যেও প্রকৃতি তার সৌন্দর্য, তার আদিমতা, তার জটিলতা সবটুকু নিয়েই শুরু থেকে অবস্থান করেছে। অরণ্য ধ্বংস, নিসর্গের বিনাশ, জলবায়ুর পরিবর্তন, প্রকৃতি সংক্রান্ত যে কোনো বিষয়ই মানুষের সাহিত্যেও পুরো মাত্রায় হাজিরা দিয়েছে। জলবায়ুর বদল বা বিশ্ব উষ্ণায়ন যে কেবলমাত্র সাম্প্রতিক আলোচিত বিষয় বলেই সাহিত্যে থিম হিসেবে স্থান পেয়েছে, এটুকুই কিন্তু আমি বোঝাতে চাইছি না। প্রকৃতির প্রতি মানুষের নৈতিক দায়বদ্ধতা ও শাশ্বত দায়িত্বের জায়গা থেকেই মানুষ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জকে সাহিত্যে নিয়ে এসছে। এখন আজকালকার সাহিত্যে প্রকৃতির কথা এলেও আদতে সেখানে বেশি জোর দেওয়া হয় এনভায়রনমেন্ট বা পরিবেশ শব্দটার উপরে। নেচার যেখানে আদিমতা বা বন্যতাকে বোঝায়, এনভায়রনমেন্ট প্রকাশ করে একটা বড় এবং বিমূর্ত ধারণাকে, যার মধ্যে প্রকৃতি এবং মানুষের সৃষ্ট পরিবেষ্টনী পুরোটাই, এই দুটোই কিন্তু থাকে। তাই সাহিত্যে প্রকৃতির উপস্থাপনা এখন আর শুধুমাত্র প্রকৃতি বর্ণনার মধ্যেই সীমাবদ্ধ নয়। মানুষের সামাজিক, সাংস্কৃতিক, নৈতিক দৃষ্টিকোণ থেকেই মানুষ তার চারপাশের পরিবেশের বদল, দূষণ, ক্ষয়কে চিত্রায়িত করতে চেয়েছে। মনে পড়ে যায় 1990 সালে শেরিল গ্লটফেল্টি রেনোর ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ নেভাডাতে অধ্যাপক হিসেবে যখন যোগদান করেন, তখন তার পদটির নাম ছিল প্রফেসর অফ লিটারেচার অ্যান্ড দ্য এনভায়রনমেন্ট। পরবর্তীকালে অধ্যাপক গ্লটফেল্টি এবং হ্যারল্ড ফ্রম পরিবেশ সংক্রান্ত তাদের সমস্ত লেখালেখিকে একত্র করে একটি বই সংকলন করেন, যার নাম দেন দ্য ইকো ক্রিটিসিজম রিডার, ল্যান্ডমার্কস ইন লিটারারি ইকোলজি। 1992 সালে এরই পাশাপাশি গড়ে ওঠে একটা সংস্থা যার নাম দ্য অ্যাসোসিয়েশন ফর দ্য স্টাডি অফ লিটারেচার অ্যান্ড এনভায়রনমেন্ট বা অ্যাসলে। তারা বছরে দুবার অ্যাসলে নিউজ অ্যান্ড ইন্টারডিসিপ্লিনারি স্টাডিজ ইন লিটারেচার অ্যান্ড এনভায়রনমেন্ট নামের একটি জার্নালও প্রকাশ করে। একটা সময় পর্যন্ত মনে করা হতো রোমান্টিক কবিতা, সেখানে ব্যবহৃত প্রকৃতি প্রসঙ্গ, নেচার রাইটিং আর ওয়াইল্ডারনেস ন্যারেটিভ নিয়ে আলোচনা করাই ছিল বোধহয় অ্যাসলের লক্ষ্য। কিন্তু জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের এই অভিশপ্ত দিনগুলিতে আসলে নতুন করে তাদের যে কাজের ক্ষেত্রগুলোকে বেছে নিয়েছে সেগুলো হলো প্রকৃতির প্রতি মানুষের নৈতিক অবস্থান, প্রকৃতির প্রতি দায়বোধ, মানুষের আর প্রকৃতির মধ্যে যোগাযোগের সেতুকে দৃঢ় করা। আসলে পরিবেশ দূষণ, ভূমিক্ষয়, বন্যার প্রকোপ, হিমবাহগুলির গলে যাওয়া, অরণ্য হ্রাস, পৃথিবীর তাপমাত্রা ইত্যাদি নানা প্রাকৃতিক বিপত্তি যত বাড়ছে, ততই সাহিত্যের সীমানাতেও প্রকৃতি আর পরিবেশকে ঘিরে ফিয়ার অফ লস অ্যান্ড ডিজাস্টার অনুভূতিটিরও জোরালো প্রকাশ দেখা যাচ্ছে। জলবায়ু ও তাকে ঘিরে আশঙ্কা সাহিত্যে কেমন ভাবে প্রকাশিত হয়েছে তার একটা খুব সুন্দর উদাহরণ 1345 বঙ্গাব্দের কার্তিক মাসে প্রবাসী পত্রিকায় প্রকাশিত রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুরের অরণ্য দেবতা প্রবন্ধটি। কি লিখছেন কবি সেখানে? মানুষ অমিতাচারী, যতদিন সে অরণ্যচর ছিল ততদিন অরণ্যের সঙ্গে পরিপূর্ণ ছিল তার আদান প্রদান। ক্রমে যখন নগরবাসী হলো তখন অরণ্যের প্রতি মমত্ববোধ হারালো। আজকের ভারতবর্ষের উত্তর অংশ তরুবিরল হওয়াতে সে অঞ্চলে গ্রীষ্মের উৎপাত অসহ্য হয়েছে। ভাবুন, রবীন্দ্রনাথ সেই সময়ই বলছেন যে গ্রীষ্মের উৎপাত অসহ্য হয়েছে, তাহলে আজকালকার দিনে উনি কি বলতেন? মানুষ গৃহীতভাবে প্রকৃতির দানকে গ্রহণ করেছে, তার ফলে আবার মরুভূমিকে ফিরিয়ে আনবার উদ্যোগ হয়েছে। জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের কারণে মরুভূমির ক্রম অগ্রসর হওয়ার সমস্যাটা বর্তমান পরিবেশবিদদের ভীষণভাবে চিন্তিত রাখে এবং সেই ভাবনার কথাই আজ থেকে কত বছর আগে সাহিত্যে বলছেন রবীন্দ্রনাথ। পরিবেশকে নিয়ে ভাবনার বিষয় সাহিত্যে যত এসেছে তত দেখা গেছে নাম না জানা বুনো ফুল, লতা পাতা, কীট পতঙ্গের প্রসঙ্গটাও কি সুন্দরভাবে জীবনানন্দ দাশ ও বিভূতিভূষণ বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়ের লেখায় স্থান পেয়েছে। কিন্তু আমি বিশেষভাবে উল্লেখ করব বিভূতিভূষণের আরণ্যক উপন্যাসটার কথা, কারণ ভাগলপুরের অরণ্য অঞ্চলের উচ্ছেদের ফলে ভূপ্রকৃতি বদলে যাওয়াটাই ছিল এর মূল বক্তব্য। কাহিনীর প্রধান চরিত্র সত্যচরণ সেখানে অরণ্য নষ্ট করে ভূপ্রকৃতি বদলে দেওয়ার সবটুকু অপরাধ আর নৈতিক দায় নিজের ঘাড়ে টেনে নিয়েছিল। এ ধরনের অপরাধবোধে ভোগা চরিত্র বাংলা সাহিত্যে বিরল, প্রকৃতিকে নষ্ট করার অপরাধবোধে ভোগা চরিত্র। মানিক বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়ের পদ্মা নদীর মাঝে, অদ্বৈত মল্লবর্মণের তিতাস একটি নদীর নাম, সমরেশ বসুর গঙ্গা। সত্যি কথা বলতে গেলে আমি যদি প্রকৃতি কেন্দ্রিক বা নদী কেন্দ্রিক সাহিত্যের উদাহরণ টানতে যাই তবে সেই তালিকা শেষ হবার নয়। কিন্তু নদীকে কেন্দ্র করে রাজনৈতিক ও সামাজিক সংঘাতের ফলে নদীর মৃত্যু ও পরিবেশের পরিবর্তন শানিত মুখ লাভ করেছিল দেবেশ রায়ের তিস্তা পাড়ের বৃত্তান্ত উপন্যাসে। ঔপন্যাসিক লিখছেন, যে কারণে তিস্তা পার ও আপেল চাঁদের শালবন উৎপাতিত হবে সে কারণেই বাঘারু উৎপাটিত হয়ে গেল। এই নদীবন্ধন, এই ব্যারেজ দেশের অর্থনীতিকে বদলে দেবে, উৎপাদন বাড়াবে। বাঘারুর কোনো অর্থনীতি নেই, বাঘারুর কোনো উৎপাদনও নেই। বাঘারু এই ব্যারেজকে, এই অর্থনীতি ও এই উন্নয়নকে সম্পূর্ণভাবে প্রত্যাখ্যান করল। কিন্তু বাঘারুর মতো স্পর্ধা কজন মানুষের আছে? প্রকৃতি পরিবেশকে ঘিরে সচেতনতাও কজনের আছে? খুব কম মানুষ উপলব্ধি করতে পারে বা নজরে আনতে পারে পরিবেশের এই ভারসাম্যহীনতার ক্রমবর্ধমান বিপদটা। খুব বলতে ইচ্ছে করছে স্বপ্নময় চক্রবর্তীর ফুল ছোঁয়ানো গল্পটার কথা। স্ক্রিপ্ট রাইটার হীরক নির্জনে গল্প লিখবেন বলে এসেছিলেন গ্রামে। গিয়ে দেখেন গোটা গ্রাম আর্সেনিকের দূষণে আক্রান্ত। দূষণমুক্ত জল গ্রামের প্রায় কোথাও এক ফোঁটাও নেই। পোকা মারার বিষে প্রজাপতি, ফড়িং সমস্ত পোকারা ঝাড়ে বংশে বিলুপ্ত হয়ে গেছে। ফুল থেকে পরাগরেণু সংগ্রহ করে অন্য ফুলে নিয়ে যাওয়ার ক্ষেত্রে এই সকল পতঙ্গের কিন্তু একটা বিশাল বৈজ্ঞানিক ভূমিকা আছে। বর্তমানে তা আর সম্ভব নয়। তাই আর্সেনিকের কারণে অপুষ্ট, রিকেট রোগে আক্রান্ত গ্রামের শিশুরা তাদের সরু সরু আঙ্গুল দিয়ে এ ফুলের রেণু অন্য ফুলে লাগিয়ে বীজ উৎপাদন, ফল সৃজন, শস্য উৎপাদনের কাজ করে। একে নির্বিচারে প্রকৃতিকে ধ্বংস করার কারণে প্রকৃতিরই এক ধরনের প্রতিশোধ নয়? জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের ফলে প্রাকৃতিকভাবে আর ফসল উৎপাদন করা যাবে না, এর থেকে ভয়াবহতা আর কিছু আছে নাকি? তাই মানুষকে এখন শুধু অপেক্ষা করতে হবে প্রকৃতির প্রতিশোধের জন্য। উন্নয়ন বা প্রগতির নামে যে বিনাশযজ্ঞকে মানুষ চালিয়েছিল, তার ফলাফল মানুষকে কিভাবে ভোগ করতে হবে তার একটা অপূর্ব বর্ণনা রয়েছে হারমান হেসের দ্য সিটি গল্পে। জনশূন্য অরণ্য অঞ্চলের শহরে পরিণত হওয়ার আর আবার নির্জন প্রকৃতির সেই শহরকে গ্রাস করার বর্ণনা লেখক দিয়েছিলেন খানিকটা এভাবে: But the forest climbed farther down from the mountains to the prairie. Lakes and rivers sprang up and dried out. And the forest moved on and gradually took over and covered the entire country. The remains of the old street walls, the palaces, the temples, and the museums. Foxes and pined mutton, wolves and bears inhabited the isolated spot. প্রকৃতির এই আগ্রাসন আপাতত যে আর কল্পিত নয়, ঘোর বাস্তব। সাহিত্যে তারই ছবি তুললে ধরে সচেতনতার মোড় ঘোরানোর প্রয়াস করে চলেছেন যে সাহিত্যিকেরা প্রতি মুহূর্তে আমার আলোচনায় সেই প্রয়াসটুকুকেই সর্বজন সম্মুখে তুলে ধরবার চেষ্টা করেছি। আশা রাখি আমার এই তুলে ধরার ইচ্ছেটুকুও যদি মানুষের মধ্যে জলবায়ুর পরিবর্তনের আশঙ্কাকে ঘিরে যে বিপদটা আমাদের উৎপেতে রয়েছে সে সম্পর্কে মানুষের মধ্যে খানিকটা হলেও সচেতনতা বাড়াতে পারে। ধন্যবাদ। থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ।
We thank Professor Gini Bhattacharya for giving us a wonderful take on the interrelationship between nature and literature. She began by citing Joy Goswami's Surjo Pora Chhai and then went on to deliberate upon aspects like eco-criticism, nature narratives, and other factors, citing copious instances from Tagore's Aranyo Devata, Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay's Aranyo, Jivanananda Das's poems, Devesh Rai's Tista Pare Brittanto, Herman Hesse's The City, and we are really indebted to Gini for this. And our next speaker for today is Famia Azka. Her topic is climate change, colonization of the atmosphere. She is a student of the Department of History from semester 6. Over to you, Famia.
The presentation, yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Famia Aska, of Semester 6 from the History Department, would like to speak on the topic Climate Change, Colonization of the Atmosphere. Climate change is the average weather in a place over many years. Climate change is a shift in those average conditions. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change. Apart from natural causes such as solar variations, volcanic eruption, forest fires, etc., burning fossil fuels, cutting down forests, using fertilizers containing nitrogen, and farming livestock are increasingly influencing the climate and the Earth's temperature. This adds enormous amounts of greenhouse gases to those naturally occurring in the atmosphere, increasing the greenhouse effect. Some gases in the Earth's atmosphere act a bit like the glass in the greenhouse, trapping the sun's heat and stopping it from leaking back into space and causes global warming. The Industrial Revolution began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries in Great Britain when manual labor began to be replaced by machinery fueled by new sources of energy. Around 1850, steam power was invented as a way to use coal energy more efficiently. And soon, steam engines were used to power trains, ships, and industrial machinery of all sorts. These inventions spread throughout Europe, the United States, and other regions, bringing enormous changes in society and commerce. Later, in the 19th century, scientists learned how to generate electricity, and the discovery of oil led to the invention of the internal combustion engine. By the end of the 20th century, the world was completely dependent on and rapidly depleting the planet's fossil fuels, resources such as coal, natural gas, and oil that are formed from the decomposed remains of prehistoric plants and animals. As Hillman explains, fossil fuels contain the energy stored from the sun that took hundreds of thousands of years to accumulate. Yet, within the space of a few generations, a mere blink of the planet's life so far, we are burning it. The result of this rapid burning of fossil resources is rising concentration of greenhouse gases. That is overheating the planet. Scientists have determined, for example, the concentration of carbon dioxide have been increasing since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In 1750, there were 280 ppm of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But by 2005, the levels of carbon dioxide had risen to 380 ppm, an increase of over 1/3. And much of this increase has occurred in recent years, since 1959, as world energy usage has expanded dramatically. Climate change is racist. So reads the title of a recent book by British journalist Jeremy Williams. While this title might seem provocative, it's long been recognized that people of color suffer disproportionate harms under climate change, and this is likely to worsen in the coming decades. However, most rich white countries refuse to accept the climate debt they owe the poorer countries and communities. This injustice, a type of atmospheric colonization, is a form of deeply entrenched colonial racism that arguably represents the most pressing global equity issue of our time. Research suggests global warming would leave more than half of Africa's population at risk of undernourishment due to reduced agricultural production. This is despite Africa having contributed relatively little to greenhouse gas emissions. In 2013, the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage was established at COP19. Climate activists hoped it would usher in a new era of climate justice. But almost a decade on, there's still no clear path to the financing required. And rich white countries continue to distance themselves from all languages of compensation or reparation of both historic and contemporary emissions. This refusal continues long histories of European racism, including the deeply racialized processes of large-scale extraction that fueled and sustained the Industrial Revolution from the outset. Sugar plantations throughout the Caribbean were worked by Africans who were enslaved, generating massive profits for Europeans that were then invested and reinvested in energy-intensive industrial infrastructure. This infrastructure helped fuel the global emissions that remain in the atmosphere today. British industrialization would simply not have been possible without stolen land and uncompensated labor acquired through colonization and slavery. Compensation for this plunder was never provided. The emissions it initiated are doubling back on those whose land and labor made them possible. Calls for reparation for colonialism and slavery have grown rapidly. Oh, it was showing I was muted. Calls for reparation for colonialism and slavery have grown rapidly over the past few years, particularly as a result of the Black Lives Matter in the US and UK. Some European states have begun to take responsibility and provide redress for colonial theft, violence, and displacement. These efforts are laudable, but there's an urgent need to focus this
Stop sharing to Canada. Stop sharing. Is it okay now?
I was saying audio and video both are not coming, audio is not coming properly.
Sure, 241 okay. Let's see. Okay.
These efforts are laudable, but there's an urgent need to focus this sentiment on climate change and, in particular, to supercharge demands for climate reparation. UN Special Reporter Philip Alston recently said the world risks a new era of climate apartheid. In this scenario, tens of millions of people will be impoverished, displaced, and hungry, while the rich buy their way out of hardship. At the recently concluded COP26 in Glasgow, the spokesperson of LMDC, a group of like-minded developing countries, said that the principle of CBDR, or common but differentiated responsibility, towards climate change cannot change into common and shared responsibility. Going into COP27 in November, negotiators from the US, the EU, and Australia must prioritize loss and damage finances. Failing to do so will only further solidify climate injustice. It is not too late to act to make real changes in the fight against climate change. Greta Thunberg, a Swedish environmental activist.
Our emissions in half 10 years only gives us a 60% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees at the risk of setting up irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. This may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity, climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Now, I would like to conclude by reciting a poem by Francis Dugan. Of global warming and climate change, we read of and hear. The changes in our natural environment gives us reason to fear. Of what does lay ahead for the children of today? We've brought climate change forward by centuries, it does seem that way. The polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate. Our polluting of a natural environment, not something to celebrate. To combat global warming, we've left it a bit late. As a species, we may well have sealed our own fate. The burning of fossil fuels and carbon emissions have gone on for too long. On what causes climate change? The experts have never been wrong. What we do to nature, in kind she repay. Global warming, a threat to human existence, many experts now say. War and terrorism as a threat to humanity seems little at all. When compared to climate change, its impact seems small. Humans not known to learn from mistakes of the past, we must change our ways, and we must change them fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Famia. Famia has basically thrown a great deal of light on greenhouse gases and global warming in general. Since the time of the Industrial Revolution, she's spoken of the book on climate change written by Jeremy Williams. She's given us details about climate apartheid and about the fiery speech of Greta Thunberg. And she's ended with a magnificent poem on climate justice. So we thank Famia, and now we would invite our next participants from the Department of Sociology. We have both faculty members and students for this occasion. They are Srimati Shathi Naik, Srimati Amreen Sarfaraz, and students Brishti Ghosh and Sneha Shrita Ishore. So over to you, Department of Sociology. Sure.
Thank you so much, Navneeta ma'am. Now, hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amreen Sarfraz, and I'm a faculty of Women's Christian College, Kolkata. Now, today, along with my other speakers, Ms. Shati Nayak, Sneha Shrita Ishore, and Brishti Ghosh, I will be speaking on the topic El Nino, climate variability and its impact. So, before we start with the actual topic, we need to understand what actually climate change means. Now, climate change, as we know, is a shift in the weather patterns and the temperatures. Now, these shifts can be man-made as well as natural. But since the 1800s, it is seen that human beings have been the main driver of climate change. Now, like the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, gas, like those actually produce heat trapping gases. Now, with climate change, we see that there's a drastic change in plants, fish, animals, corals, and human kingdoms. Now, next, we need to understand what is climate variability. Climate variability is the variation that we see in climatic procedures. And every year in a specific time period, the climate of a location is different. Like some years have below average rainfall and some have average or above average rainfall. Now, what is the difference between the two? Climate variability includes all the variations in a climate that last longer than individual weather events, whereas climate change only refers to those variations that persist for a longer period of time, typically decades or more. Now, as example, we can see that the example of climate change can be melting of glaciers, rising sea levels, and examples of climate variability can be droughts and El Nino. Now, since the main topic that we focus on today is El Nino, we will now discuss about what actually El Nino means. So, moving on to our next topic.
Now I am going to discuss about El Nino.
In Spanish, El Nino means small boy or Christ child, as it was initially seen by South America fishermen in the early 17th century. The phenomenon was given this name. Seas tended to become warm in the Pacific Ocean around December, which is why the name was picked. El Nino refers to warming of the tropical Pacific Ocean with changes in wind velocity and atmospheric pressure. This climate variability dramatically affects the frequency and intensity of storms. The result can be droughts and increased flooding, both causing severe water management challenges. El Nino Southern Oscillation is a cycle of warm El Nino and cool La Nina episodes that happen every few years in the tropical Pacific Ocean. It is the most dramatic year-to-year variation of the Earth's climate system, affecting agriculture, public health, fresh water availability, power generation, and economic activity around the globe. The term El Nino has evolved in its meaning over the years, leading to confusion in its use. The World Climate Research Programs also express the view that the definition of El Nino needs to be clarified because the phenomenon involving El Nino has become very visible in recent years as a dominant source of interannual climate variability around the world. There is a need to provide a more definitive meaning. However, this works only if it is accepted by everyone, and past attempts have not achieved such a consensus. Now, if you go on to the next slide, in the In the El Nino, we can see that the red color indicates warm temperatures, whereas in La Nina, in characterized with cool temperatures, the color blue is associated with cool temperatures. Now we move on to the next topic.
El Nino is a complex and naturally occurring weather pattern that results when ocean temperature in the Pacific Ocean near the equator vary from the norm. The phenomenon typically occurs every 2 to 7 years. In an El Nino year, the trade winds weaken or break down. The warm water that is normally pushed towards the West Pacific washes back across, piling up on the east side of the Pacific from California to Chile, causing rain and storms. Often a year after an El Nino, the pendulum swings back and La Nina occurs, which is an intensification of the nominal patterns. Together, the cycling of El Nino and La Nina is called El Nino Southern Oscillation (ENSO). The changing weather patterns can be having damaging impacts on agriculture, fisheries, ecosystem, health, energy demand, and air quality, and increase the risk of wildfires around the globe. Sea surface temperature usually peak around December, but bigger impacts are often felt a few months later as global oceans gradually heaten up. Typhoons in the Pacific, wildfires in Indonesia, heavy rains and floods in the southern eastern India and flooding of the Mississippi River have been attributed to El Nino. Following are the differences between nominal year and El Nino year. Over to the next topic.
Thank you. Now, as far as the impact of El Nino is concerned, we will see the next slide where we see the conditions and the effects. Now, it results in droughts, El Nino basically,
floods, storms, cyclones, hurricanes. Now, as we see that due to droughts, the crop and agriculture failures are evident. And there, due to warm water, humid weather, there's a boom in mosquito population and termite population. Now, due to mosquito population, excessive mosquito population, there's a risk of malaria and dengue. Now, due to lack of water for sanitation and hygiene, there's also the problem of diseases. There's problem of blowing dust. Then stagnant water also causes much problem. Now, higher sea levels affects the salt water intrusion into water supplies, coastal erosion, and damage to shoreline and property. Warmer and humid sea temperature basically results in plankton, coral, and fish kills. So we see that it hampers and impacts all the living kingdoms. Now, over to next topic.
In order to understand the concept of El Nino, it's important that one should be familiar with non-El Nino conditions in the Pacific Ocean. Strong trade winds blow westwards across the tropical Pacific, the region of the Pacific Ocean located between the Tropic of Cancer and at the Tropic of Capricorn impact on ocean. El Nino temperature, speed, and strength of ocean currents. The wealth of coastal fisheries and local weather from Australia to South America and beyond. Increased rainfall, convection above warmer surface water brings increased precipitation. Rainfall increases drastically in Southern America, contributing to coastal flooding and erosion. Diseases caused by floods and droughts. Diseases strike in communities devastated by natural hazards such as flood or drought. Positive impact. El Nino reduces the instances of hurricanes in the Atlantic. In South America, as El Nino brings rain to South America, it brings droughts to Indonesia and Australia. These droughts threaten the region's water supplies. In Western Pacific, these winds push water surface towards the Western Pacific where it borders Asia and Australia. Due to the warm trade winds, the sea surface is normally above 0.5 meter higher and 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in Indonesia than Ecuador. Conditions brought on by El Nino can lead to catastrophic effects. El Nino years often results in a shift toward early snowmelt, early spring flows, and depletion late spring and summer flows in snowmelt dependent basins. Over to the next topic.
Now I am going to talk about previous El Nino events. El Nino events of 1982 to 83 and 1997 to 98 were the most intense of the 20th century. During the 1982 to 83 event, sea surface temperatures in the eastern tropical Pacific were 9 to 18 Fahrenheit above normal. The El Nino event of 1997 to 98 was the first El Nino event to be scientifically monitored from beginning to end. The 1997 to 98 event produced drought conditions in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Peru and California experienced very heavy rains and severe flooding. The Midwest experienced record-breaking warm temperatures during a period known as the Year Without a Winter. The 2015 to 2016 El Nino, however, is being called a Super El Nino, the worst in 15 years. The two previous Super El Ninos occurred in 1982 to 1983 and 1997 to 1998. Now, if you go on to the next slide, we can have a look of the normal earth conditions, which in its contrast with the El Nino and La Nina conditions. In the El Nino, we can see that the red color indicators warm temperatures, whereas in La Nina, the same region is characterized with cool temperatures. The color blue is associated with the cool temperatures. Now, moving on to the next topic.
Next, we discuss the impact of El Nino in the Indian subcontinent. Mainly in the Indian monsoon, which besides India, it affects other regions of South and Southeast Asia as well as Australia, and it is most monetarily important because of its profound influence on the economy of India and the neighboring countries. It is directly linked to the ENSO phenomenon. In summer months, temperatures much of India rise to as high as 110 degrees Fahrenheit, while the Indian Ocean is much cooler. Consequently, the warm air over the land rises and cooler moisture-bearing air blows in from the sea, bringing heavy rains to the region. The Met Department often blames the El Nino phenomenon for below normal rainfall. It is being said that El Nino has affected rainfall, bringing it below normal 8 times in the past 14 years. For particularly India's case, it is said that in summer to autumn, when the Indian monsoon is active, it is likely to suppress the monsoon convection and kill off the rainfall. This is only around perhaps 10% or so of the total rainfall in the monsoon season, but that 10% is a big change. It affects agriculture, it causes breaks in the monsoon when there's no rainfall at all, and if that lasts too long, then obviously crops wilt and die. So it affects and impacts our agriculture. In another view, according to Balaji Rajagopalan, he says that this phenomenon is connected to the variability of summer monsoon rains in India, but even in the last 25 years seems to have reduced forecasters' ability to predict the monsoon to a mere roll of the dice. He further says that the effect turns out to be more adverse for India as the country lacks large reservoirs that can moderate a drought impact on food supplies. Next, we discuss the effects of El Nino and La Nina on the Indian climate. El Nino generates warm weather across the Indian subcontinent in the winter and dry conditions as a deficient monsoon in the summer. In contrast, La Nina causes a better than normal monsoon in India. During the El Nino years of 2002 and 2009, India had little rainfall, although the monsoon was typical during the El Nino years of 1994 and 1997. This signifies that India faced droughts during the monsoon for nearly half of the year due to El Nino in the summer. El Nino harms crops such as paddy, maize, groundnut, castor, tool, moong, as well as bajra. Now coming to the impact of El Nino on the health of people. We can see that both droughts and flooding may trigger food insecurity, increase malnutrition, and enhance vulnerability to various infectious diseases. Droughts, flooding, and intense rainfalls may cause loss of life, significant population displacement, water and vector-borne disease outbreaks, and may damage or close health facilities. El Nino may also result in extremely hot and dry conditions, and this may lead to heat waves, wildfires, increased smoke, and deteriorated air quality. It also results in damaged or flooded sanitation infrastructure. Large populations are already which are already affected by various humanitarian situations like migration and refugee camps, they face heightened risk of suffering health consequences of either wet or dry conditions. Thus, globally, natural disasters such as droughts, floods, and storms kill more women than men and tend to kill women at a younger age as well. These effects also interact with the nature of the event and social status. The gender gap effects on life expectancy tends to be greater in more severe disasters and in places where socio-economic status of women is particularly low. Next, we go on to the impact of El Nino on Indian economy. Okay, now as far as the impact of El Nino on Indian economy is concerned, we see that it adversely affects the Indian agriculture. Now, it leads to higher food prices and inflation of essential commodities like rice, dal, sugar, etc. Droughts in India due to El Nino has resulted in millions of deaths over the course of 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. The shortages in food supply resulting in inflation eventually pushes the RBI and the government to adopt a more cautious approach to monetary and fiscal policy, respectively. If the drought is severe, it would dry up major sources of fresh water, leading to a water crisis like situation. Another important source of income for the farmers is livestock and the fisheries. Both the areas are affected severely by the drought. Also, many Indian industries, textile, construction, power, etc., are dependent on water. So, hence, El Nino can have adverse impact on Indian economy as well. Now, we move on to the next topic. At the same time, El Nino also impacts the various ecosystems. So, globally, the narrow coastal and equatorial upwelling zones account for much of the biological productivity in the world's oceans. One-celled plants, known as the phytoplankton, are the base of the aquatic food chain in various regions and all higher organisms. And all these depend directly or indirectly on the basic food source. Upwelling ecosystems are rich in species diversity, including many types of phytoplankton, shellfish, crustaceans, fish, marine mammals, as well as seabirds. So the primary productivity is the rate at which carbon is taken up by the phytoplankton via photosynthesis. Now, what is problematic here is that when El Nino occurs, it directly and dramatically affects the fisheries. And one such example was observed in the 1972-1973 El Nino in Peru. So Peru is seen as one of the most productive fishing nations in the world. And during this El Nino, much of the damage was done in the fishing zones. There was concerns voiced that overfishing might lead to the depleting of stocks from the sustainable levels. Intense fishing also affected the high mortality rates of the fishes as well as the marine ecosystem during the 1972 and 1973 El Nino. So, with all these various aspects that we have discussed so far, we can see that the El Nino, it impacts the various society, the various economy of the global system.
one of the basic and most important and observable impacts on the global economy was during the 1997 and 1998 El Nino. Now, given all these various aspects, it is our duty, it is the world's duty to have an idea of the global phenomenon so that we may adequately plan for our future. As communities develop disaster preparedness plans for severe weather, they should also prepare for the potential increase in diseases such as waterborne illness, which may be influenced by a change in climate and in the quality and quantity of water resources. Further understanding of the impact of climate variability on the environment, public health, and control of infectious diseases, as well as the conditions that lead to El Nino, is necessary to refine preparedness plans for public health protection. Sharing resources and knowledge requires interaction between climate research scientists, the water industry, and the public health community. The possibility of such a relationship may be best recognized through the environmental health sector, which could provide the following regular communication to the health and the scientific communities. Like there can be various updates on El Nino predictions, better disease surveillance, communication with physicians, laboratories, and environmental epidemiology programs, recording of localized weather events, and proactive assessment of public health impacts, review of the various preparedness plans, establishment of contacts with wastewater and drinking water utilities, as well as assessing the reports on the various lessons learned from the previous El Ninos that has occurred. So, the relationship between the ocean and atmosphere and associated global climate conditions are further understood, and scientists will be able to accurately predict weather patterns, including the beginnings of El Nino episodes, up to 1 year in advance. As a result, the water industry and public health professionals can prepare for long-term human and environmental events. With this, we come to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
We thank the entire sociology department for a wonderful take on the binaries of ocean and atmosphere. They spoke of climate variability, the ravages caused by El Nino and La Nina in the Pacific, in the Indian subcontinent, in the Southeast Asian region, and so on. They spoke of how it wrought havoc in the realm of agriculture, in the realm of economy, and Shati in particular spoke of preventive measures to minimize the ravages caused by El Nino. So we thank the entire sociology team for their wonderful presentation. And with that, we come to our concluding awareness program. It is meant to be a cultural program in which we have 3 semester 4 students from the Department of Bengali, Rupsha Oddi, Onuja Ganguly, and Debolina Mondol, who with their recitation and dance are surely going to give us their take on ecological awareness. So over to them.
প্রকৃতি আমাদের পরম বন্ধু। প্রকৃতি আমাদের পরম বন্ধু। জীবনের প্রতিটি মুহূর্তেই আমাদের প্রকৃতির প্রয়োজন হয়। শ্বাস নেওয়া থেকে বেঁচে থাকার জন্য খাদ্য, জল যা কিছুই আমাদের প্রয়োজন, আমরা সব কিছুই পেয়ে থাকি প্রকৃতির থেকেই। প্রকৃতি আমাদের মায়ের মতন আগলে রাখেন, সাহায্য করেন, কিন্তু আমরা আবার এই প্রকৃতি মাকেই বারংবার আঘাত করি। এই আঘাতের ফলে যে কেবল আমাদের প্রকৃতি তথা বাস্তুতন্ত্রই আহত হয় তা কিন্তু নয়, আমরাও সমানভাবে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হচ্ছি। প্রকৃতি যেমন দূষিত হচ্ছে, তেমনি আমাদের সম্পদগুলো নষ্ট হচ্ছে। গাছ কাটা, বনভূমি জ্বালিয়ে দেওয়া, চোরা শিকার, খনিজ সম্পদ অতিরিক্ত পরিমাণে উত্তোলন করে বড় বড় ইন্ডাস্ট্রি তৈরি করা, এই সমস্ত কিছুর ফলে আমাদের বায়ু, জল, মাটি ক্রমশ দূষিত হচ্ছে। যানবাহন, আধুনিক যন্ত্র, এসি, ফ্রিজ ইত্যাদি থেকে তৈরি হচ্ছে বিভিন্ন দূষিত গ্যাস, যেমন সিএফসি, CO2, কার্বন মনোঅক্সাইড ইত্যাদি। এই গ্রিন হাউস গ্যাসগুলি পরিবেশে মিশে বায়ুমণ্ডলের তাপমাত্রা বাড়িয়ে তুলছে। এর ফলে দেখা দিচ্ছে গ্রিন হাউস এফেক্ট। এছাড়াও হচ্ছে বিশ্ব উষ্ণায়ন, বরফ গলে যাচ্ছে, ফলে সমুদ্রের জলস্তর আরো বৃদ্ধি পাচ্ছে। সমুদ্রের জলস্তর বৃদ্ধি পাওয়ার ফলে পৃথিবীর অনেক ছোট ছোট দ্বীপ আজ জলমগ্ন হয়ে পড়েছে। অনাবৃষ্টি হওয়ার ফলে দেখা দিচ্ছে খরা। মরুভূমির সংখ্যাও ক্রমশ বৃদ্ধি পাচ্ছে। এইভাবেই একটু একটু করে আমরা প্রকৃতিকে ঠেলে দিচ্ছি ধ্বংসের পথে। আমরাও আজ বহু প্রজাতির প্রাণী ও উদ্ভিদ প্রায় বিলুপ্তির পথে এবং কিছু প্রায় বিলুপ্ত। তাই আমাদের প্রকৃতির বন্ধু হওয়া একান্তই কাম্য। আমরা গাছ লাগিয়ে প্লাস্টিক জাতীয় বর্জ্য পদার্থের ব্যবহার কমিয়ে প্রকৃতিকে যত সংরক্ষণ করব, ততই আমাদের জীবন ও ভবিষ্যৎ পৃথিবীটাও সুন্দর হয়ে উঠবে। এইভাবেই প্রকৃতি মায়ের ওপর মানুষের নির্মম আঘাত ও অত্যাচার সহ্য করতে না পেরে যে সকল লেখক কলম তুলে নিয়েছিলেন হাতে, তাদের মধ্যে অন্যতম একজন হলেন কবি রঞ্জন ভট্টাচার্য। তিনি তার সারা পৃথিবী হোক বিশ্ব বান্ধব এই কবিতার মধ্যে দিয়ে প্রকৃতির ওপর মানুষ ও তার কর্মফলের যে পরিণতি, সেই নিয়েই আলোচনা করেছেন। তিনি তার কবিতার মাধ্যমে দেখাতে চেয়েছেন প্রকৃতির ওপর মানুষের নিষ্ঠুর ও অমানবিক অত্যাচারের দিকটি। এখন আমরা কবি রঞ্জন ভট্টাচার্যের সারা পৃথিবী হোক পরিবেশ বান্ধব কবিতাটির আবৃত্তি শুনেন।
হয়তো একদিন এই পৃথিবী ধ্বংস হবে হিমবাহ গলনে, নয়তো বিরামহীন তুষারপাতে ঢেকে দেবে বরফের আস্তরণ। ছিদ্র হবে পৃথিবীর ছাদ পামির মালভূমির, বসে যাবে আন্দিজ পর্বত কিংবা হিমালয় শ্রেণী। সমুদ্র বইবে মরুভূমিতে, বাতাসে জমবে কার্বন। পৃথিবীর ফুসফুসে ক্যান্সার, অববাহিকা দক্ষিণ অ্যামাজন। ক্ষত বিক্ষত হবে পৃথিবী প্রচন্ড উল্কাপাতে, ঘুমিয়ে পড়বে পৃথিবী সেদিন আগ্নেয় লাভাস্রোতে। বন্ধ হোক গ্রিন হাউস এফেক্ট, সাথে অরণ্য নিধন। পৃথিবী হোক পরিবেশ বান্ধব, সুস্থ হোক অ্যামাজন। প্রকৃতি হোক শান্ত সুন্দর, রোষ হোক দূর। বিশ্ব উষ্ণায়ন সংযত হোক, মিলিত হোক সুর।
রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুরের রচিত প্রকৃতিমূলক সঙ্গীতগুলির মধ্যে আমাদের নির্বাচিত অন্যতম দুটি সঙ্গীত হলো পিনাকিতে লাগে টঙ্কার ও বাঁধ ভেঙে দাও, এই দুটি গান। প্রথমটির মধ্যে প্রকৃতির প্রতি অত্যাচার ও ফলাফলের করুণ দৃশ্যটি আমরা লক্ষ্য করে থাকি। দ্বিতীয়টিতে রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুরের দর্শন প্রতিফলিত হয় প্রতিবাদে। মেঘমাল্লার রাগ ও দাদরা তালে রচিত পিনাকিতে লাগে টঙ্কার বসুন্ধরার পঞ্জর তলে কম্পন জাগে শঙ্কার গানটিতে দেখা যায় মহাদেব শিব যখন তার প্রলয় মূর্তি ধারণ করেন, তার ফলে যেমন তাণ্ডব অনিবার্য হয়ে পড়ে, তা ঠিক তেমনি মানুষের অসচেতনতামূলক কাজের জন্য প্রকৃতিও ক্রুদ্ধ হয়ে যখন ক্রোধে ফেটে পড়ে, তখনই দেখা যায় খরা, অনাবৃষ্টি, হরপাবান, গ্রিন হাউস এফেক্ট, বিশ্ব উষ্ণায়ন, মরুভূমির সম্প্রসারণ প্রভৃতি। ইমন রাগ ও কাহার বা তালের ওপর রচিত বাঁধ ভেঙে দাও গানটি মুক্তধারা নাটকে ব্যবহার করেছেন রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর। এতে লক্ষ্য করা যায় যে প্রকৃতি যদি একবার ক্রোধে ফেটে পড়ে, তখন তাকে আটকানোর সাধ্যই আর কারণ নেই। মানুষের কাছে এত আধুনিক প্রযুক্তি থাকা সত্ত্বেও তারা প্রকৃতির ধ্বংসলীলাকে আটকাতে পারে না। এইভাবেই প্রকৃতির করাল ধ্বংসাত্মক দিকটি ফুটে উঠেছে পরবর্তী নৃত্য পরিবেশনাটির মধ্যে দিয়ে।
Man has been living amidst nature throughout history. The bond between us and the environment, which ought to have been a harmonious one, has, over the ages, become increasingly fragile and tenuous, given man's insatiable greed. This unbridled and unceasing exploitation of nature often incurs her wrath, leading to havoc and destruction all around, threatening the humankind with eventual extinction. Tagore has consistently espoused the idea that man's overall well-being depends on striking the right balance with the world around him. Tagore's works have critiqued mindless modernization and exhorted the newer generation to restore and preserve the human-environment balance. We conclude today's program with a dance recital set to Tagore's songs. We would just request our technical team to give us 2 minutes. We shall set the laptop and then we'll get back to the dance recital. আসছে
বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কা, বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার, বসুন্ধরার পঞ্জর তলে কম্পন জাগে শঙ্কার। বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার, বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার। আকাশেতে ঘুরে ঘূর্ণি, বৃষ্টির বাধা চূর্ণি, বজ্র ভীষণ গর্জন রব, প্রলয়ের জয় টঙ্কার। বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার, বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার। স্বর্গ উঠেছে ক্রন্দে, সুর পরিষদ বন্দী, বিবির গহন দুঃসহরাতে উঠে শৃঙ্খল ঝঙ্কার। দানব দম্ভ করছি, রুদ্র উঠিল করছি, লণ্ড ভণ্ড লুটিল ধুলায়, অভ্রভেদী অহংকার। বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার, 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 বিনা কেটে লাগে টঙ্কার।
With that, we come to the concluding part of today's webinar. We take this occasion on behalf of Women's Christian College to record our sincere gratitude to the Ministry of Science and Technology and to the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India, for having given us an opportunity to organize this webinar on the impact of climate change on our ecosystem. We would like to thank all the organizers, especially Shri Devendra Singh and MS Palak Dikshit and their entire technical team for enabling us to participate in this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav program. Additionally, we are immensely grateful to our principal madam, Dr. Ajanta Paul as well, without whose guidance, support and motivation, this webinar would not have borne fruition. We thank all our faculty members, especially Dr. Gini Bhattacharya, Srimati Shati Naik, Srimati Noyana Dotto, and Srimati Amrin Sarfaraz, as well as our student participants, Sharnali Nandon, Famia Azka, Vrishti Ghosh, Sneha Shrita Ishor, Ruksha Oddi, Onuja Ganguly, and Debolina Mondol, who have worked concertedly to make this webinar a success. We thank our own technical team comprising Dr. Onisha Roy, Srimati Shathi Naik and Sri Rohan Mondol for helping us out with their technical expertise and to our support staff for their logistical help. We also thank the members of the audience, both staff and students alike, for encouraging us with their presence. This brings today's webinar to a close. Thank you. Palak, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you once again, Palak, for organizing everything. And with that, should we, should we log out? Do
Yes,
you have
ma'am. You
anything to
can.
tell us?
No, ma'am. You can
I'm
log out.
sorry?
You can log out.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
ma'am. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.